Brad, welcome to the Way Champions Conference. We are so excited to have you here.
Yo, thanks for having me. I really appreciate it.
Yeah,
I
well,
want
we're
to add.
excited.
I
Yeah,
want to
go
add
ahead,
this.
Jerry.
I want to add this. People will say, we're honored to have you, and yes, I'm going to say that, but I really mean it. And there's a reason. You don't just say you're honored. The reason we feel honored is because the work that you do, what you have done, is emblematic of everything we're trying to teach in our daily life. And ever since the first time I got to realize who you were, it was actually back in 2007, that 30-win season that you had with
Mhm.
Butler. And then from there, you leapfrogged and I think it was 2010 and 11, Final Four, final game, Duke, 2 points, 3 points away from winning the national championship and what have you. And I'm watching you on the sideline. I'm saying, oh my God, that's amazing what they're doing. And it wasn't so much what they were doing as how you were being. And so I just want to say that I really admire that. And that's why I was so excited about you coming on, not because you have a name to deliver, but because you actually represent the kinds of things that we feel we value and that are important for these young coaches who are listening to us right now. So I just want to get that point across real clearly.
Well,
The
thank
other
you.
thing, you bet. And the other thing I want to say is a few years ago, this is to tell the audience how you and I got connected in this way. But a few years ago, you actually took the Celtics to Carmichael Arena on the campus of North Carolina in Chapel Hill, correct?
I did.
And then you got there, and from what I understand, you sat down and you had an amazing, long, involved lunch with a mutual friend, Anson Dorrance. Tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah, it was, a couple of people from their administration, along with Coach Williams, Roy Williams, and Anson, Jay Larinaga, and I, who was my assistant at the time, all sat down and we just talked shop. And so we got a chance to meet Anson. Had heard great things about Anson, have obviously followed him throughout the course of his career and know he's one of the most accomplished coaches in all of sport. But to hear his passion after whatever 30 years as a head coach or whatever he was at that point in time, probably more than that with all the,
Yeah.
he had played in 21 of 22 national, or he won 21 of 22 national championships at that time. Was just amazing, right? And so I grew up, the year I graduated in college was 1999. So I followed the 1999 World Cup team, right? The 99ers that ended up being that great team with chock full of North Carolina soccer players that, became legends in the sport. And so to get a chance to speak to their coach and spend time with their coach was really a fun moment for me. He's really special.
Yeah.
He really knows how to connect. He really knows how to push. He's very passionate. He's very driven. And so it was a fun day.
And he's a reader too, which I love. He's read every book that's possible, right? But you learned a lot from him, and as I do. I mean, I remember working down there, working with his team, working with lacrosse, working with field hockey, and I remember the lunches. We always had to block out at least 2 hours, and the reason is because I was going to sit there and listen for 2 hours and go to school, and it was just such an amazing. I have a notebook filled with Anson notes
Yep.
and what have you. So we learned so much from coaches. Are there any other coaches, some other coaches that would be high on your list that we can tell our listeners to pay attention to?
I've been lucky because Jerry, as you know, I've been able to pick up the phone and talk to pretty much anybody over the last 10 years. It was a lot harder when I was an assistant at Butler than it was once I became the head coach. And then ultimately we went to the Final Fours. But so I've gotten a chance to learn from a lot of people. I love going across sport and learning from people that are coaching other sports. You see all of the similarities and in what's most important that applies industry to industry, sport to sport. But then, so I think that that's one of the great, benefits of being in this position now, not necessarily even as a head coach, but now, in a front office position of being able to pick up the phone and reach out and watch people practice, being able to watch them go through their daily job, being able to talk to them about the cultures that they've built and the things that they've done that are important to them, the lessons they've learned along the way. Last time I saw Anson was on a conference call, not a conference call, just a Zoom call that we were doing, irregularly, maybe, once a month or once every other month. And it was Anson and Gino Auriemma and Chris Peterson, the head coach at Washington, who stepped down or 2 years ago. And Tim Corbin, head baseball coach at Vanderbilt, like just a monstrous group of, champions. And, you learn so much from those people who, for the most part, are coaching other than Gino in a different sport. And so, lot to be learned for sure.
Lot to be learned for sure. John, you have some
Yeah,
things you
well,
want to say.
I just think you make such a great point, Brad, and I want to just reiterate that for those listening right now is that I think, you have the technical and tactical aspects of your sport, but then I think where we all meet in the middle, that's coaching, right? How do you connect with human beings? How do you communicate, give feedback, build a group, find a shared purpose? That's coaching. And it doesn't matter if you coach basketball, you can learn that from the volleyball coach. You can learn that from that. Did you have an environment, like Butler or in the university? Because one of the things Anson has told us and other coaches, Jenny Levy from UNC, is that UNC is a wonderful school of like, you could knock on anyone's door and pick their brain. And that's so important, isn't it?
It is. We very much had that environment. I mean, it was wide open. Football coaches would stop in, both basketball teams, volleyball. I still talk to a lot of the coaches at Butler, that we shared, offices with or right down the hall. And, I think that's one of, again, the rewarding parts about being in a college and part of a campus environment is, you could always go right down the hall and really learn something or get outside of your own little bubble and stretch yourself a little bit. And so whether it was helping each other in recruiting or just talking shop or just spending time together, talking about balancing coaching and life, I think is all stuff that, I would say was almost a daily thing there. And it certainly was something that you did, very regularly.
No, for sure. So one of the things that Jerry and I were talking about that we both really admired about you, watching you coach, is your sideline demeanor. And what I mean by that, and I don't know, I'm going to give a Brad Stevens quote, and you can tell me if this is a misquote, but teams play teams play directly off the coach's mood. And what I think you meant by that was, that what you project on the sideline is what they're going to do. And so you see, to us from the outside, you project this great calm. And so, first of all, do you feel that same calm inside? And I'm fascinated at this because when I try to project calm, I am not feeling calm inside.
Yeah. I think, it's interesting. I'm so curious to be in my new position and watch a game next year when I really don't have any control at all. And I think I think that one of the things about coaching is that you do have you're in charge of the substitution patterns, you're in charge of the play calls, you can change coverages, you can do all kinds of things where you may not be the person doing it, but you certainly can impact it. And so I do feel like I was pretty calm most of the time. The heart didn't beat too fast very often. But I learned that when I was on edge, for whatever reason, whether it was, I was upset with an official, upset with how we played, whatever the case may be, that it was usually a reflection of I wasn't as good that day. I wasn't as prepared that day.
Wow.
And then when you feel that way and you look that way, your team ends up that way. And so I think that, I learned that early on. I remember I've told this story several times. My first year at Butler, we were 8-0 and we went to Wright State, who had a really good run there in our conference. And we were playing an early season conference game on the road. And I was on edge because I thought starting off the conference was as important as starting off 8-0. We had already beaten 4 high major teams. We'd beaten Ohio State by 20 and Michigan by 20. And like, we were really good. And we go to Wright State and we lose like 43-41, something just terrible. And it was purely because I was on edge. It was purely because I impacted our team's, ability to play free and with a clear mind that day, because I was concerned about the outcome. And starting off the conference well, that team ended up like 30-4 or something like that. And we should have ended up 31-3 because that loss was completely on me. And so I learned a lot about in that moment, like, I'm not going to do that again. I'm not going to go into a game worried about what the outcome means, what, the residuals of losing this game will mean. I'm just going to go in. I'm going to do the best that I can. I'm going to prepare the best I can. I'm going to coach and, let the chips fall where they may. And so that was a great learning experience that really impacted the rest of my coaching career.
And was that something from your days as a player, your days as an athlete, were you able to also look at that and say, who's the coach? What's the coaching demeanor that I liked to play for? Because I mean, let's face it, still, even though I think we see a shift right now, there is still this stereotype that if the coach is not ranting and raving and marching up and down the sideline, he or she is not doing her job.
Well, you got to remember where I grew up. I grew up in the state of Indiana, and I would have walked to Bloomington, Indiana to play for Coach Knight. And I probably would have lasted about a week because I wouldn't have been able to handle it, you know? And so I grew up in leadership and coaching, and all of that came with this visual of that presence. Bob Knight, Gene Katie, all over the officials, fired up, fiery guys. And so that was, and that's how I grew up in basketball. And a lot of, as you can imagine, a lot of the state of Indiana coached like that. High school, a lot of fiery high school coaches. I played for a high school coach who I loved to death, but he was not afraid to get into me at all. And I didn't think twice about it then. And I don't really, I look back on nothing but fond memories now. My college coach was a little bit more probably like me from the standpoint of a little bit calmer on the outside, but clearly like very, very driven and competitive. And it's funny, I probably didn't appreciate that style at that time as much as I do now. And so, it's, when you're a kid, I think it's, you're just learning what you think is best. But I don't know that I was really taking anything that someone else was doing and saying, I have to be that way. I learned at Butler early on that, you have to be yourself. I learned at Butler early on from Thad Matta and Todd Licklider that there was a totally different way of doing it than Coach Knight did it, that I had always grown up admiring. And it didn't make his way wrong. It just made all of their ways authentic. And so that was what, you try to find out, you try to learn, and then you try to apply when you're fortunate enough to get your opportunity. And I was at a very early age. I had great role models who I learned a lot from, but I did not try to be them because I didn't think that would be real.
That's a great point you're making. I have a lot of people who say to me, can you help me be more like Brad Stevens? So can you help me be more like Steve Kerr? And my answer is no, I can't, but I can help you be more like yourself. But we can take what Brad Stevens has learned, and we can take what Steve Kerr and Quinn has learned, and maybe you can learn them too. So that opens up the whole question is some of the things that you've learned, is there anything you could pass on? Because a lot of us, look, if your coaching style is to get in people's face, what can we do to balance that? Because it seems to me you're talking about having a balance. Like there's a time for a good hug, but there's a time for a kick in the butt.
Well, and some of the coaches that have the best relationships with their players are the ones that get into them the hardest. But they dive into that relational side. Like they make sure that they know they love them before they do that. And I think that that's really important. You know, my natural lean is to believe in people and believe in, you know, what they do best and let them soar with that. I don't spend a ton of time focusing on what people don't do well. I just don't have much interest in that. You know, it's kind of a negative way of looking at the world. I think that we see all the time in the NBA or, you know, in probably any walk of life, people get nitpicked for what they can't do. And people forget about how great they are at what they do. And, you know, even from a media standpoint, the way
Yeah.
that some people, you know, overanalyze some of our game's greatest players. It's like, are you missing the greatness? Are we not paying attention to what's going on right in front of us? And I know that obviously there's a, you know, critique sells, but I think it's important to be able as a coach or as a person in my position now, or, you know, if you're, you know, you're in an education position, that you're more focused on what people do best and how to help them soar with those strengths.
Love that. Do you feel like, I mean, I think this is a really important point to reemphasize with our coaches listening as well, because I think sometimes many coaches, well, I want to find a coach that I'm going to model, and I don't have direct access to that coach. So I watch Sky Sports or ESPN, and all I see is that 1% on the sideline coaching the game. I don't see the 99%, the unseen hours of that connection, of that love, of that authentic, letting that kid know that I'm in it for you, right? I see you smiling because obviously that resonates, right?
Well, it just resonates from the standpoint of people, you know, people create whatever narrative they want about you, right? And
Yeah.
I think that, you know, my narrative for all those years was, you know, super calm, you know, even keeled, and, you know, totally driven by numbers. And I would say that, you know, I'm less driven by numbers than most. And I am, you know, I think very competitive, and I'm certainly not afraid to share what I'm thinking, but that's usually behind closed doors at practice or in a film room. And it's, you know, not usually in a, you know, in a negative way. It's just in a, hopefully a constructive way. But at the end of the day, like, some of that stuff is just, again, like you said, the 1% of what people see. And I think that, you know, then people form their own narratives around it. So I think it's like, again, you go back to, I wouldn't model, you know, I don't think there is a leadership style that doesn't include authenticity. Like, and so everybody's leadership style should be a little bit different because they're their own person. And, you know, I don't think there is one way to do it. I don't think there is a right way to do it, a wrong way to do it. I think that people find different ways of getting to successful places and impacting people. And again, you know, you might have a person who's super loud and has a big presence and gets on people all the time, and they may be the coach that players feel the very best about, because those are the people that, for whatever reason, have they felt like is sewn into them, you know. And so I think that there's no exact way to do this, but authenticity is where you start with it.
Love it. What about the word pressure, and what does that mean to you? And do you feel it when you become a college head coach, when you take over an iconic organization like the Celtics, and even in a new job now, which is a new thing for you,
Yeah.
where you have a great responsibility? What's pressure, and how do you deal with that?
It's a lot different than the way it's explained on the outside.
Okay.
You know, it is simply the responsibility you feel to do your job well. It's not to, you know, I never felt pressure to win every single game. I wanted to win every single game. I put everything I had into winning that individual game, but I wasn't afraid of not winning the game. You know, I think that that's probably the biggest difference in me at 44 than me at 30. I think that, you know, I always had a healthy fear of failure, probably an unhealthy fear of failure growing up. And as I got into coaching and studied the growth mindset, you know, concepts, and became more comfortable in my own skin, like that there's things you can't control and things that are out of your control. then, I felt like, again, it was so much more about the input than the outcome. And so I feel very comfortable in saying anything that you can do to put your signature on and do your best, that's enough. And so I haven't felt like, people talk about the pressure cooker of Boston. And, I think that part of that is because it's a sports town that loves its teams and has great fans, but I don't confuse that with, shock talk sports stuff. I don't confuse that with, getting blasted occasionally on TV or the radio or whatever the case may be. That just doesn't, as I get older, that stuff becomes so much less of what adds to pressure than your own internal desire to perform your role well.
Did you find part of your job also was removing that pressure from your players, right? Especially now, like with social media, where, we've talked to Ron Adams and Steve about like, hey, halftime, like people are on Twitter worried more about what's said about them on Twitter than what your coach is saying to you in the locker room,
That's real.
Yeah.
So I think the biggest thing that I would say to that is that if you're going to be an athlete or an entertainer, somebody that's going to be, have high notoriety, the part of the reason why you get paid what you do is because people want to pay attention. They want to talk about it. TVs pay big contracts for these games. Media follows all these games. And with that comes scrutiny. Now that scrutiny is quadrupled from what it once was because of, social media and the instant feedback era that we're in. And you better be able to resist that. You've got to be able to separate from that. You've got to be able to, if you're not one of those people that it just flies off of and doesn't affect at all, which is maybe 1% of us, then you need to be able to manage that all appropriately. And you need to have people around you that are managing it all appropriately. Like, it doesn't do me any good to not have Twitter on my phone if my wife is reading me everything that they're saying on Twitter after every game. And so you have to have people in your network, in your circle, that are saying the right things and helping you in the right way and supportive in the right way, and also understand what's important and what's not. I'm sure there's been plenty of instant feedback to players and coaches that has been right, but there's a lot more that is just like, it just is a way to stir the pot or make you feel bad about yourself. And that's just not worth it. And I think that that's really important. One of the things I love, one of the things I was fearful of was raising kids under the limelight. And one of the things I love has been that they've learned that the limelight doesn't mean anything more than anything else. Like, they could care less about, they're not, when they've gotten a chance to meet big time coaches or big time players, they see them as people, not as what everybody else may talk about them as.
Jerry?
I'm just taking notes here. It's like another class. This is great. When I listen to you, Brad, one of the words that pops up is vulnerability. And I'm just wondering, when you hear that word vulnerability, I know we've talked to Steve about it and we've talked to Anson and others, but what comes to your mind when it's related to the new position you have or the coaching you've done? What is the role of vulnerability in your personal life? Could you speak to that?
Yeah. I was reading a great article the other day from, I think it was from the Stanford Business Journal, but it was actually written by, or the focus of it was one of our lead investors, Irv Grousbeck, who is a Stanford business professor. His son is Wick Grousbeck, who is our governor of our team. And it was about how the best thing you can say in this position, or one of the most authentic things you can say, is, I don't know. And I think that there's so much truth to that, especially now that I'm in this position. Now I'm in charge of the basketball operations side. That means not just the team, not just the coaches, but the trainers and the chefs and the, front office and all the people that are part of that operations. And, I don't know everything I need to know about this job or what I'll know about it in 5 and 10 years as I live it every day. But I know the meat of it. I know how, what we need to do to improve. I know where our weaknesses are. But there are a lot of things that I'm going to have to lean on others to, have them help guide me through it. And so I think it's important anytime you're in a position of leadership that, you understand that you don't have all the answers. You're actively seeking those out, but you're leaning on the expertise of those people that work around you, or maybe those that, have a similar job in another, in another organization that can help you navigate that. So I, like anything else, I lean on the people around me.
What I find is, I'm not surprised by your answer, by the way, but what I find is true is that vulnerability for most people is something they admire in others. I think people admire you for that reason. I think that you walk into a board meeting or you're sitting down and you just say, I just don't know, but I'll get back to you with what I can find. People admire it in others, but we don't like it in ourselves. We don't like to admit that we're vulnerable, but yet one of the most amazing aspects of great coaching is the coach who can say, that was on me. I blew it. Like you did with that one game when you had a 30-4 season instead of 31-3 that you were referring to. And to be able to do that, I want the coaches to hear that from you, if indeed that's something you can say, because so many coaches out there are afraid of being wrong. They're afraid of saying they are wrong or they don't know something. And boy, and that's a strength, isn't it?
Well, I think it's a strength that, again, you want to build over time. I think when you have a fear of failure, it's a lot harder to be vulnerable. When you're operating out of a growth mindset, you feel like it's an easier thing to really embrace. And I think it's also easier for a person like me to talk about, or Steve to talk about, because we've gotten a chance to coach, for the Boston Celtics and the Golden State Warriors, so we also understand how lucky we are, how fortunate we are. And, I think that's a part of it too. When you're trying to work your way up or prove you're really good, then sometimes you're least likely to be vulnerable or be outwardly vulnerable. Now, that doesn't mean that you're not that with your team. And I think that's really important. Probably the best thing I did my first year of coaching was bring the 5 seniors into my office and just say, like, I'm going to make a lot of mistakes and I just need you guys to hang with me. And if you have any real issues with what we're doing or anything, just come talk to me individually. Let's not make it a big deal, because we've got to, hit the ground running and make this go the right direction. We've got a bunch of young players that are looking at you for leadership. And they were unreal. And, it's not a coincidence that, we did make some mistakes that first year. And again, the one that I referenced cost us a game. And, but that group was really good. We ended up getting beat in the round of 32. I don't remember hardly anything about the game other than it went to overtime against another really good team in Tennessee. But the freshmen and sophomores in that team went to the Final Fours. And so those were like, that was a starting point for those kids, and the seniors' willingness to let us make mistakes and make sure everybody stayed on one page was huge.
Yeah.
So I think that's there's so many examples of being vulnerable. There have been several times where I haven't been vulnerable enough, or not certainly didn't handle situations right. But, I do think that the longer you're in it, the more you realize what's in and out of your control, the more vulnerable, you recognize everybody's vulnerable.
Yeah, like the serenity prayer, know the wisdom to know the difference between what you can control and what you can't. I kind of remember Steve. I think, John, you remember this too. Steve's comment around vulnerability had something to do with, however, you really have to know your shit. You really got to know what you're doing. and then you can be vulnerable. But if you don't know what you're doing and you're going into a room with a bunch of guys and say, "Guy, that was on me. I just blew it. I don't know what I'm doing." You got to know your stuff. And I think that has to come through too, don't you?
Well, you can do that. And you can not know it and be vulnerable, but it probably won't last long.
Yeah.
Hopefully you know it. Steve knows it. So, and so it's interesting. Like, I pay attention to other coaches, and the way they handle the media and the way that they deal with the outward expectations or the questions that are presented to them. And, Steve's a great example of a person that just handles it so perfectly, because he understands that he's going to be accountable. He's going to be vulnerable. And even if it's not the root of the issue, he also understands it ends the story. And so, like, he knows how to manage all of that. And so, but that takes a lot of humility to do that. It takes a lot of willingness to be accountable to do that, and certainly a lot of vulnerability to do that.
And modeling too, right? Like, you're out there modeling, like, hey, I'm learning too, right? I'm trying to get better. I'm reading about leadership. And so are you. So we talked about vulnerability, authenticity. One of the favorite things that Jerry and I talk about a lot is connection, and that ability to connect with and communicate with your athletes. Do you have any tips or things that you liked to do to get that message one-on-one to a player, to a player's spouse, to someone who influences that player, that you knew would help them out? Because Steve told us some interesting ones that he did. Anything from you that are like, you're like, man, this is something that worked well, or hey, this is something that blew up in my face and didn't work so well?
No, I don't have anything that really stands out. I was pretty consistent, and I just usually go directly to the player and just have as honest and open a dialogue as possible. So didn't spend a lot of time going to people outside of him. Certainly it could be if they need help or they need something that we can help with, we'll do anything we can, and we'll talk to whoever we need to talk to. But I usually always start with just a direct one-on-one, open, transparent conversation.
Mm-hmm. And just letting them know that I'm in it for you. Like, this is for you, right? Yeah.
Yeah. And I mean, that's one of those things that I think people believe even more over time. Like, that's the hard part about the pros. Sometimes you only have somebody for 6 months or a year or whatever. And the difference between that and college is when you recruit somebody starting at age 16 and then they leave you at 22, like, it's there is a different bond there, I think, than, and that's why the college game and those formative years are so unique and special.
Mm-hmm. And that's a unique time in life as well versus a 30-year-old or whatever, and the things going on.
Yeah, there's a huge difference between a 21 and 22-year-old finishing their college career and, excelling at that step at the end of their college career before they enter the next phase, and a 21 or 22-year-old that's already in the pros and trying to prove they belong. There's a huge difference in perspective and kind of situation, right? And pressure. And so I think that there's such an interesting thing to look at with, both groups are super high achieving, but it's just who you're competing against on a daily basis makes those pressures even more difficult.
Jer, anything to add on to that?
Well, just the idea of a competition, who you're competing against. I think, again, we get back to perspective. And how do you feel about the idea that on one hand, we're competing to earn a spot, to earn a place on the team, or we're just competing to make each other better? And, at the pro level, maybe we see more of the former. We trying to compete against each other because we need to have a spot on the team. This is our life. Whereas in college, it's more like we're going to make each other better, that kind of a culture. Is there anything there that's worth talking about?
I think it's pretty similar. I mean, I think you see in pros, it's funny because I think I've never been on Wall Street or never been a part of these big consulting firms that, get all the Harvard and Stanford, business grads. But I'm guessing it's pretty similar, right? When you're talking about highly prideful and high potential people, they want to prove themselves. And so there is a phase that you go through, whether in college or in the pros, where you want to prove yourself. There is a phase that you go through where you want to maximize your impact on the floor. And there's a phase that you go through ultimately, if you do it long enough, where you realize this is what I do best. I'm very self-aware with that. And winning is way more fun than anything else I've ever done. And so and I think that, I've always said this in college, everybody wants to win, but freshmen want to play, sophomores want to start, juniors want to score, and seniors need to win. That's the difference. Everybody wants to win, but that's the difference. The seniors, when they start looking out the, as they're riding on the bus and they're looking out the window and they're seeing, the last couple of trips go by, they know that they don't have anything left. This is what they've invested all their time for. And then that need to win just feels different. And I think you see a similar path with a lot of young players in the pros. And again, it's not anything that is a negative. It's just normal. I think that that's just what people, everybody envisions kind of their career looking like.
How do you take that? I love that line, by the way. That was awesome. I'm going to write that down later on, but that was fantastic. Cause again, usually that senior, then when you feel that almost scarcity and this is coming to an end, there becomes this selflessness of I'll do whatever it takes to win. How did you, I guess, on the college level and also on the pro level, where so many kids looking to jump into college are, it's me, got to get the stats, got to get myself noticed, and blend them into team. And then obviously same thing, the college player coming to the pro of hey, you got to give to the team. And I know you scored 25 points a game in college, but you're not getting any shots here, but please play some defense. How do you do that? How do you take me to we?
Yeah. I mean, I think with age, it helps, with perspective, with experience. It's so much easier to talk about that with your professional players that have kids, right? They just have a different feeling about the world. There's a different perspective, and they're just they're now responsible for this thing that is so much bigger than them. And I think that, but everybody has it at different levels, at different ages, and at different stages. But for me, I was a good example, even at the Division III level, of that, not fully 2 feet in for the whole good of the cause until I was a senior. And I don't think that made me a bad person, but I think it also didn't make me as good of a teammate as I should have been. And, now that I look back on it, what else was there? Why else was I doing it? I certainly wasn't doing it for the accolades or the 12 people that came to our games, or so what was the point? The whole point is to be a great teammate. And so I think that the older you get in it, the more you're in it, the more you're around it, the more you realize, if we could just embrace that, then that's all that really matters. And so, and I think, I had to write a letter to my 9-year-old daughter that was published a few years ago, for this group that, just asked a bunch of people in the community to do that. And, that was my letter after I tore up 100 of them because I couldn't get the right words, was just defining what I thought a great teammate looked like, because I thought that was the most important thing we could tell her. And so I think that that's something that if we can all embrace at some point, life just becomes a lot more fun.
Did having kids change you as a coach?
Yeah, I would say that for sure. Now, my kids, I have a 15-year-old son, be 16 in November. So for most of their lives, I've been a head coach. I was an assistant when we had him. And it certainly changed, my perspective on, what was important. And, but it certainly has always also informed my perspective with throughout these last 14 years. And, has been a big part of why I have or haven't made professional decisions, and because, it's really important to me that they feel like dad's a big part of their life and dad's involved in their life. And we've been really lucky because we've only made one move. I've been in coaching or in now the front office for a couple months, but this has been our whole lives and we've only moved once. That's pretty unique. We're pretty lucky. And I think we recognize that.
I have a very good lifelong friend who just got fired from a professional coaching job. And, it's a hard profession. I mean, it's the one profession where you're almost guaranteed to get fired at some point in your life if you're in it for long enough, right? And it's such a hard thing. And I've for many years talked with him about his journey as an athlete and as a coach and with his family, and how he's much like you in that he passed up certain opportunities because he wanted to be with his kids, it's a crazy journey for sure.
It is. And, the hardest thing about my transition right now has been knowing that some of my staff will be retained by the new coach and some of them won't. And so how do we help them navigate that? And that has been very difficult because that is something that, people go through all the time in coaching, but at the same time, when it hits you right at home, it's something that is a great challenge. But yeah, you're right. I mean, we all get into it knowing that it's eventually going to end and probably end not the way you want it to, but it doesn't make that any more or any less difficult when that happens.
Jerry, do you have anything else before we get into a couple of our rapid fire questions here at the end?
Yeah, for sure. I look at coaching. I think leadership for me has been a big part of my life. I started thinking about leadership when I was a 13-year-old boy, and my dad was a battalion chief in the New York Fire Department. And I used to go and watch him. And I watched him during the summer from the chief's car, and I'd watch him lead men. And I was very interested in what comes first, the chicken or the egg. Do you become a leader and then you do your leading, or do you learn about leading before you become a leader? And so I boiled it down to this. I think that life, our experiences in life, my experience in particular, sort of prepares us to be a coach, a good coach. And then we keep learning as we go. Like you said, Brad, you have kids and you learn from them certain lessons of life you might or might not want to know, but you need to know. But then I come back to the whole point is the more you coach, then the more you seem to be better prepared for life. But you get older, and I'm just wondering if to take that question and say, so Brad, now that you're going to be president of basketball operations for the Boston Celtics, in what way, if any, has coaching and your leadership experience prepared you for this next step, for this next move in life?
Well, there are a lot of ways where I feel like I'm, swimming upstream right now, but I think and I've got a lot to learn, obviously, but I do think the one area that I should be good at is maintaining perspective throughout the ups and downs of a season. Like I've lived it, I've said all along, and I've told Ime this when we hired him, like, in a sick and twisted way, I'm looking forward to the first loss so I can go and tell him I've got 250 of those. Let's go grab a beer. We've all, it's not going to be perfect.
Yeah.
And I think it's important that people here understand that. And that's one of the things I think was really like rewarding about working for Danny Ainge was he had been a player and a coach.
Yeah.
And he always said that coaching was the hardest thing that he's done. And I think that he treated me like that rang true. Like he really, really went out of his way to be not only empathetic, but to be supportive at all times. And I think that that's my job now, is to just be a support for Ime and his staff and our players. And, they're going to give everything they have, and we should be here to support them.
No, it's all about learning and then using those lessons to no matter where we find ourselves, even if we're grandfathers or new fathers or whatever we are in life. And I think the beauty of sport is it just becomes this microcosmic classroom for everything we need to really know and to find out why we're here on Earth, right? I mean, aren't we supposed to serve people? Isn't that the reason
Yeah.
why we're here? Anyway, John, what were you
Yeah.
going to say? You were going to have some.
Well, I was going to just kind of bring it to an end here because I know we have a very busy guy here in Brad, and
Oh yeah.
there's been so much gold here already. I don't want to overwhelm people with too much more. But what I was thinking, one of the things we've asked all of our coaches who have presented for us here is, for you as a leader, as a coach, as an executive now, what are the non-negotiables for Brad Stevens? Maybe, as a dad as well.
Well, I think that those things are, first of all, I think that one of the things that's really important is I want to enjoy who I'm working with. I want to enjoy where I'm working. I want to have want to have a goal, but I also want to enjoy the journey of getting to that goal. For me, it starts with being a great teammate, right? And I think that is something that I look for in, people, and I appreciate about being around, the assistant coaches that I had when I was coaching, the players that we have had, everybody in our building. Those relationships are probably the most important thing. And I think then you just, the other thing to me would be that you put your signature on your work every day. You give it everything you have. You do it for the good of the whole. You do it to get better at your own job. You do it to improve the whole. And, again, see where the chips may fall. I've been lucky enough to be, on really good teams, teams that have, had chances to play for things that are really, really special. And very rarely when you look back on those teams, whether at Butler or here, do you think about the individual games or even the moments of the games. You think about the people and the individual times with the people. And I think that's where that's the special part about being a part of a sports team. And so you hope that that's part of, why you walk through the building every day.
Mm-hmm. Some nice lessons for coaches out there listening to give to their teams and what really is important, being part of a team in that way, being a good teammate, which is just an extraordinary thing to say. And we lose track of that because of the winning and the losing and all of this. But I wanted to, John, if I may, ask Brad this. I know you're obviously, to me, you're a lifelong learner. You've got this growth mindset. It comes through in how you're speaking. But I also know you're a voracious reader. I was just wondering, is there any book you have on your night table you want to share with us, or any books that you're reading right now that might illuminate some of the things we talked about, or maybe not,
I don't know how much it illuminates what we're talking about today. I'm reading one that I'm enjoying right now called The Hot Hand by Ben Cohen, which has been a good, interesting book that, talks about a little bit, argues the analytics of saying that there's no such thing as a hot hand, which all of us that have ever touched a ball and seen that ball go through the net 5 or 6 times in a row know is not true. Mm-hmm. And there is this moment in time where you feel like the rim is the size of the ocean. You can throw the ball in it from any angle, from any depth at any time. And so I'm really enjoying reading that, but it's more for my personal enjoyment than necessarily
Is there
significant growth throughout this time.
Is there a book that you've gifted more often to others or gifted to players that you felt like, hey, this is something that you need?
Probably Mindset by Carol Dweck. I mean, I know that's probably a pretty popular one, but yeah, I read that one of my first years in coaching. I don't remember when it was published, but I know I was on it early on in the Butler years. And so that was, as a head coach, that was helpful in me in defining kind of my own expectations of going through this.
I love that book. I remember the first time I read this, I'm like, why didn't I get this in the delivery room when my kids were born? This would have been super helpful.
Super helpful. Yeah.
Awesome. Well, I'm plumb out of questions. Jerry, any final comments?
No, I'm over the moon with this. This is like so exhilarating to me. I don't know if I can handle anymore. I really don't.
Brad, this was fantastic. I know all of our coaches on the conference here and everyone listening in really appreciates this. And, what really came across to me, we talked about your calm demeanor. Just in talking to you here, that exudes. Like I feel like I'm learning and you're so calm that I'm just drawn in. So I can see why so many players for so many years have responded to your coaching. Thank you so much for being here.
Well, it's my pleasure, guys. Thanks for having me.
Thank you, Brad, so much. I really appreciate it.